inside everything.
All right.
Okay. Welcome back to another episode of the Strategy Inside Everything. We got a very interesting topic today and an interesting guest that, and interesting is probably the wrong word. It's more than that. I was super engaged, of all places, on LinkedIn. Eric Thomas is our guest today, and he posted something on LinkedIn that I immediately connected with him and said, "Hey, you got to come on my show. I want to hear more about your perspective on this." So please welcome today the senior partner at Saga Marketing, Eric Thomas. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm pretty good, man. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm good. Dude, thank you so much. I reached out to you and you said I'd be happy to do it. So thank you so much for making time. The topic you brought up is really interesting to me. But before we get into that, give me a sense of your background, kind of where you started and how you got to where you are and how you founded Saga Marketing.
So I grew up in the city of Detroit, in Detroit proper, as in the confines of where people pretend that it's so scary that they couldn't survive. And I started off doing graphic design, kind of learning it with my friends and on my own and on the internet. Kind of graduated to doing branding by following some people that I really respect. Uh, Became partners with a couple of guys. Now it's still partners with one of those guys, Marcus Burrell. We eventually, a couple of years ago, maybe about 3 years ago, started this agency called Saga that we call a storytelling agency. And so, though my background is in graphic design, I read something from David Ogilvy that kind of said, the basis of all advertising has got to be the written word. And so it really made me kind of rethink my approach. And so I started kind of writing and blogging on LinkedIn of all places. And, really to kind of figure it out. I dropped out of college. I graduated high school with a 1.8. I've always been able to speak well, but I don't know exactly what to do with commas. So I figured I would just learn on the public stage. And 3 months into that, my first blog post went viral, about 1.5 million views on LinkedIn, about Steve Harvey. I've got about 3 million reads to my blogs on LinkedIn. I've had the opportunity to speak at colleges I wanted to attend. I spoke on Detroit on a panel at MIT. I've spoken for the IDSA, Industrial Design Society of America. I was sandwiched between like the head of, global branding for Coca-Cola and the head of design for Philips. And I've had some really interesting opportunities come up from just writing and speaking and talking about the things that I'm passionate about.
Hey, I have not read your post, the first post you mentioned about Steve Harvey. What was your take on Steve Harvey? Was that around the time of the Miss Universe pageant?
Yeah, I wrote about how bad design is the reason why he misread that card, and I kind of redesigned it pretty quickly. Like that night, I didn't even watch it. I wasn't even interested. But my timeline goes crazy. Like, oh, look at this flub. So then Charlemagne the God, he posts a picture of the card. I was like, well, that's design flaws. So I, pretty quickly within about 15, 20 minutes, designed what I think it should look like hierarchy wise. Wrote up a piece about why design is important, posted it to the internet maybe around 12 o'clock at night and went to bed. Woke up and, my normal blogs were doing maybe about 1,000 reads a post. By the time I woke up, it had about, 5,000. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. But by the middle of the day, it had about 100,000 reads. I was like, well, this is pretty crazy. 4 days in, I've got, 1 million reads to this thing.
That's wild.
It was republished all around the world, in the Philippines and all this kind of stuff. Cited and all over the place. It was pretty nuts. That was before I started like writing my name at the end of the thing and linking it to my property. So I missed a lot of impressions, but it was a learning experience and it was really cool. I mean, I've gone from that to writing my first piece for the Financial Times that just came out. About gentrification and the city of Detroit and economic revitalization. So
that's crazy.
It's been a wild ride. 3 years has been a wild ride for me as a person who, by all means, by all statistics, shouldn't be writing for the Financial Times.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obvious that you have a lot of ideas that are valuable. Just from my quick scan, from the first post I saw and from my quick scan of stuff you've written, Do you think you would have kept writing as much as you did if you didn't get that response to that first piece, that Steve Harvey piece?
I think so. I mean, my goal was to. So I had a goal, and that goal was to get at least um like 2,000 reads per month. So I would write and write and write until um people added up to that. So maybe I would get 200 reads and then 400 reads and then 500 reads and 1,000 reads, and I would just do that, and I would stop at 2,000. Eventually, every once in a while, because I mean, I think the post after that only got about 5,000 reads, and so I would just continue to do that and write again the next month. What really made me stop writing on LinkedIn was the fact that LinkedIn started to like kind of hide the posts. So my normal posts get between 2,000 and 5,000 views. I get about 250,000 impressions or views to my posts per month on LinkedIn. But when I posted an article, it would only get 500 reads and 500 views. So I noticed that LinkedIn was kind of like artificially suppressing those posts. And so I'll just write my ideas into the body of the post, which doesn't allow me to be as thorough or put as many sources, but it does allow me to have more dialogue and talk to more people.
Yeah, I think that's probably more valuable anyway, ultimately, because you get to people can ask questions and you can give back and say, well, this is what I meant by that, or good idea, I should have added that, or whatever. There's more to it than you're not just broadcasting.
Yeah,
Interesting. So
absolutely.
the post that got my attention was something that you wrote about how we are wearing out creatives. I think that's the exact phrase you used. And it was
Yeah,
kind of like this.
we're killing our creatives.
You went into this idea that it's like we think is just a light switch for creatives, but we never turn the light switch off. And it's always like, well, you got 10 minutes to design this, and then when you're done with that, take a 4-minute break and then get back and give me more logo designs in another 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way we treat. Well, okay, it's two problems here. The way we treat creativity is all screwed up. We treat creativity like it's magic. People say to you, "Oh, just make it great. Just create. You're the creative." They'll say, "I've got this idea to start this business. You're the creative. Make it work." And creativity is work. It requires a lot of work to do that. And then on top of that, we treat creatives like they're just cows, right? Like we can just pump them for milk forever. And what we forget about creatives, I mean, hell, you can't even do that for cows. You have to artificially impregnate, like you have to impregnate them and steal their babies, right? Like in order for them to continue to produce milk. I mean, it's never been a safe way to do anything. What we also forget about creatives is that the reason why the work we do is unique is because the way we see the world is unique. And so we have this duplicitous idea that we want creatives to act like the rest of us while seeing everything differently. And that's not how this works. Um, many creatives, and I'm not saying that most people don't, but many creatives suffer from, mental health challenges, bipolar disorder, depression. They're trying to find a way to sink back into the world in a normal way. But when you spend your entire life seeing it differently, it's hard to kind of feel like you fit into it. And so we tie a lot of our self-worth to our output in the work that we do, because that's when people celebrate us. They say that you're great. And so when we're pumping and pumping and pumping and trying to turn creatives into a factory, and then people are just turning it down and telling you that it's trash, or telling you it's not great, or not paying you for your services, or telling you that their nephew could do it, we're forgetting that we're telling people that their entire self-worth is something that their nephew could do on a whim. We're telling people that that not only is their ability to create a part of their identity, but it's not all that good, it's not all that special. Why should we have to pay you for that? And then we're telling you to do it on a dime instantaneously. We want you to see all of the cracks and all the seams and all the things in the universe that everybody else can't see, and we want you to spit that out immediately, when we spent really most of our life finding those little moments and nuggets. And so it's dangerous. It really is. It's really dangerous. And we expect creatives to work at different hours than everybody else. Graphic designers get called at 12 at night, like, can you turn this thing around by 7 in the morning? Like, as if it's not strange. You don't get that for people who work at desk jobs, really.
No, you would never.
You know?
You would never call an accountant and say like, "Oh, hey guys, it's 9:30. We need by 8 a.m. I got a meeting tomorrow, so I need you to really quickly just get all the books ready."
Yeah, just quickly knock out that accounting. What? Yeah. Wake up all your friends. I need you to shoot me a movie really quickly. It's
Yeah,
like, what
it's
in the
pretty.
hell? And I want you to do it for less money with lower cost
Yeah,
equipment.
well, that there's always that the price thing of how much it should cost, or the kid down the street can do this, so why should I pay you? Is a whole different battle. I want to unpack was there an event that happened that made you post this thing? Was there a project or something you saw, or you were just thinking about it and recognizing it all of a sudden?
It happens at least once per project. But I always find myself fighting for my creatives, the people that I contract out to, the people that have worked for me. And then I've been doing graphic design for about, 10, 11 years. So I've been experiencing this for my entire career. And I have the added pressure of people calling me a creative genius, quote unquote, which I don't really identify with. I think a lot of the stuff that I've been able to do comes from the fact that I agonize over things that maybe most people don't think about. I've been on a rant about two very different things. For the last few weeks, I've been ranting a lot about how terrible men have been in society, and how we haven't really taken account of the things that we have done, and how women are forced to live in relationship to us. And I've been ranting and raving about how incredibly well crafted the movie Avengers Infinity War is. Right? Like, those two things are my current rants, but it's all about things that we don't realize, that we say, that don't make any sense. I've always seen the world kind of like the first time it's been said, right? Case in point, there is this idea that women who have sex with a lot of men are bad, right? That they're sluts, right? Well, for me, I think it's really weird, because having sex with a lot of women taints the women, right? But it doesn't taint the man.
It's a very weird.
So if you said a woman has sex with
gone forever.
But here's what we haven't thought about, right? In any other instance in the world, the thing that pollutes is the problem, right? The men are polluting the women. The snakes are venomous, so the snakes are bad. But in this culture, only the sex part is bad to the woman. The men are not the poison, when technically in this case, men are poison. And so I sit around and I agonize about things like that. But I think about them and I talk about them and I think about them and I workshop them and I talk to them and I work on them and I write about them and I bring them back and I dialogue about them. And then when I say them on a stage, people go, "Oh, what an instant moment of clarity." Well, I've been workshopping this idea for 5 or 6 years.
They've been background processing it until it actually makes it to your fingertips and you key it out.
Yeah.
Do you think the idea of I've been thinking about the idea of, we're killing our creatives and we're wearing them out. Do you think that applies to all knowledge workers?
I think so. I think it applies to a lot of different people at a lot of different scales. I think humans, for the most part, probably aren't meant to do factory style work. Like just monotonous, overly routine things that don't exercise their minds. Now, I'm not saying that some people are not fine to do that work. I'm saying that shoving everyone into those roles is dangerous. I think just about all work, all people who do, the knowledge work are subject to that. But I think creatives are in a unique position. And I think it's simply because it's a creative's job to see the world differently. And in order to do that, you kind of have to be a little different. You can learn tricks, right? Like constantly asking why. If somebody says to you, if you really want to do a creative exercise, keep asking why until you get to the core of it. One of my biggest things I hate in the world are doors. I think doors are a waste of an opportunity. We've been using doors the same way since the Middle Ages, right? They've always had a hinge. They've always kind of turned. They always have a knob. The question becomes, what is that for? How did the door get here? Why does it exist? Well, in my opinion, a door is a semi-permeable membrane that allows you to move between spaces, but also give you some privacy, right? That's what a door is. So why is it what it is? So if you continue to keep asking why, that is an exercise that would help you get there.
Yep.
But what you meet in creatives is you see these very kind of strange people who've always been asking why. Since they were like 3 years old, they've been trying to find out. And that why never ran out. They weren't beaten in submission by the fact that the world just is. But that creates a kind of a typical outcast type of scenario for those folks, or for us, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't think I think creative people may not even verbalize the why. It might be internalized and turns into the output of they get to a conclusion that leads them to some kind of a creative idea that they can put out through design or words or whatever their format or medium is.
Right.
So that takes time.
And it takes time. You got to think about how much time that takes. I mean, even just the process of becoming a great painter requires you to understand how form, shape, light, color, and all of those fit together in a space. And then how do you translate that into a two-dimensional plane? You're really questioning size and scale in the context of depth versus relationship to each other on a flat canvas. Like most people don't have to think about those things. The TV's over there and the couch is over there. It's not what is the space between them. And then if I had to translate to that was something that was two dimensional, how would they then relate to each other? And if it's something that is black, if it's further enough in the distance that it's shrouded by atmosphere, so it creates a blue tint because light's reflecting off the particles in the air, right? This is a different type of understanding of space. I mean, and that's what you have to deal with. And then when you're doing all of that and somebody goes, man, my nephew could do that.
That's nuts. So is it the time crunching or it's not the time crunching necessarily. It's more that it's on demand and the demand doesn't move. It's I need this by tomorrow and that's inflexible, but you're going to come up with something out of nothing. And you have to do that in this tight time window.
I mean, there's a couple of things. I think you have the time crunching. You also have the fact that I don't think a lot of environments are conducive to creative thought. Sometimes we get to the place where everything becomes really utilitarian, and so you just kind of stuff everybody in cubicles and boxes. And then you create a system because your clients have certain expectations. So you create a system or process by which you create things. And so you kind of have a lead creative who's kind of directing all of your creatives, and then they kind of have to bend to the will of that lead creative. The biggest challenge for that is how does your environment lead up to creative exploration and execution? If your job is to understand the world differently, how do you continue to create if you haven't been exposed to the world, if you're sitting in this cubicle this whole time? Unless you're expected to solve cubicle style problems, you may not ever solve any of the big challenges that you want to.
It's pretty interesting way to think about it. And now that you're saying it, look at how few people make it from beginning of the career as a creative at age 20 to retiring in the creative industry. It's so easy to burn out because of those factors that you just laid out.
I mean, people are literally killing themselves. I mean, if you look at somebody like Elon Musk, who I do count as a creative, I think the way he sees the world is in that way. He's also an engineer, so he's deconstructing and finding ways to put it back together. But he's also questioning the fundamental fabric of what we live in. When he said, we need a new battery for this car, he didn't just question that there's a battery. He questioned all of the individual components of the batteries. He rebuilt the battery almost himself and then got his team to help him with it. He reconstructed rockets and how we even get into outer space. But he's also being expected to do that and manage the business and do all those things. And so we're watching kind of a very public meltdown of what it looks like when a creative runs out of steam. I think Kanye West is suffering the same thing. Mac Miller already killed himself. Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain. These are creatives who who have ascended to the highest of highs. But you look at somebody who, like Kurt Cobain, who was divorced from his own reality. He started his career railing against the system that he rose to the top of, and he couldn't reconcile himself within the structure
Yeah, it
of
became a
of
became an
corporate life and trying to
overwhelming.
be creative.
Now, this I've thought about. I've thought about this a lot. Not in relation to Kurt Cobain, but the idea of some Mark Pollard, who was a guest on this show a while back, has talked a lot about depression and done a little research into it. He was on, and we were talking about the idea of depression for strategists and for creative people indirectly. One thing I think that leads to depression for people in agencies is a lack of control of the output. It's you're creating this thing, but you really, once you share it with the first person, it becomes something that's not yours, and so then you just become someone who's pushing buttons to get the thing done. So you're working in these strict timelines and these structures that you don't control to produce an output that is not yours, and you're kind of trained to not be passionate about it.
I mean, yeah,
Do you think that's what someone like Cobain went through, that
that's
same thing, where it's the first album they recorded songs they loved, and then by the third album that they were expected to make, it was just like, now we need you to keep feeding the meter here because we're expecting to make this much money for the record company.
it's crazy. I always wonder about that, right? You see these artists that blow up and they talk about overnight, but these people are working on stuff for their entire life. So the first album is a culmination of everything they've experienced in their entire life, all culled down into the perfect, example or version of that. And then, so you take 20 years leading up to this album, and then your next
18
album has to
months,
come out
right?
next year. What more could you grow, within the next year, except for the experience you had within that year, and that's why I think you see some depth drop off. But once again, you are putting people into that creative churn, and they're doing it within the context of touring for the first album and promoting and doing social media now and adding all these other layers on top of it. And so I think you're seeing a lot of very intense, very clear creative burnout. But you also see people. There's a suicide and mental health epidemic in Silicon Valley, where there's an incredibly high amount of suicide in their high schools and in their startups, because they're expected to change the world every day, but within the parameters of this confine. And that's not how this works. Like, that's not how you create.
You've thought about this a
It
lot,
is.
I can tell. And so you mentioned the idea of environment as one of the factors that you were just kind of running through. Have you thought at all about changing what could change in the environments to make them more conducive to creative people, or just mental health in general, I guess?
I think like, I have this new rant I've been on. I've got about 50
sounds,
million
Eric,
rants,
like
and
you
one
have
of
a
the
lot
ones
of
I hate
rants,
is
but I want
company
to hear this one.
culture. I'm a man of rants. I think company culture is some BS, and I'll tell you why. I think we've gotten to the place where company culture is starting to supersede individual culture, right? And so we create these companies where we're like, okay, we're about this thing. So it's about fun and joy and bright colors, right? But what it really does is it creates an environment where you get to say, this person doesn't fit my company culture because they are different than the 17 white guys who we hired into this place. And that's not fair, right? A Bangladeshi guy and a Nigerian woman and a Filipino, a trans Filipino woman might see creativity entirely differently. So to say, all right, come into this place, we drink beer every Friday, and that's our creative execution, or that's our creative opportunity. that might not be the
Hmm.
same. Say
So it's
the person
so
happens to
how
be
do you
Muslim. My
build
friend
culture? How do you
Maher.
build culture to be more inclusive, or to be more not inclusive of culturally inclusive necessarily, but I guess different approaches to creativity. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But creatively inclusive. I think you have to really I think you have to create a much more malleable space where people are feel safe to bring themselves to work. When I talk to a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, they're not bringing their entire identity to work because they think it would either scare their peers, or they're ashamed of their customs in the greater context. Um, what happens when you say, on Thursday we're playing all of Maher's music, like anything he brings in, we're going to listen to that, and not only we listen to that, he's going to tell us about it, at 4 p.m., and we're going to really get an understanding of what growing up in that household was like. um, and then we're going to do that for everybody, and we're going to just let people and new recruits come in, and they're going to play their music. I mean, music is an incredibly great way to bond. Maybe you share that with the food on Friday, and we begin to build and then we can say, hey, everybody who really shares this experience, we want you guys to get together and do whatever you want to do on Friday. So we can then share that, and we can understand where you come from and why. And what is that world experience like? And what is your grandmother's stories? What are they about? That's how you really build a culture that's inclusive. And that's how you talk about culture in the context of lived and shared experiences. Just having beanbags doesn't make you culturally sound and relevant. Painting the doors green and shit, that's not changing anybody's life. um it's really gonna have to come down to what is the human experience, and how do we start making people feel safe to
Do you think the
to
more we
explore
can
and fail on their
understand
own
each
terms.
other individually, so if I understand you and you have stories about your grandmother, or you have stories about coming from some other city than Detroit today, wherever you lived or wherever you're moving to, if I can understand that person as an individual, then that'll help me interpret signals from them on when they're getting an assignment, or when they're getting stressed, or when they're trying to explain an idea, how I can kind of shortcut it to understand, like, oh, okay, this is the part they're hung up on, instead of just looking at everything as black and white and saying, no, that idea's off and you have 10 minutes to fix it.
Yeah, imagine how different your creative conversation would be, and really all of your life conversation would be, if you went into a conversation about solving, maybe you were selling hamburger helper or something, and you were introducing a new product to the market, and Triage says to you, you've had a conversation with Triage, maybe your Indian coworker, about what dinner times were like, and you guys are all having a conversation about dinner, from maybe a suburb in Wisconsin, and all of a sudden it's not lining up, and Shriyash is kind of coming up with these ideas that are not really meshing with anybody else's, but then you remember something he said about his meal time, and then you remember the massive influx of Indian Americans that are moving, or that are immigrating here, and where they're settling, and where they live. Because
Yep.
what you find out about immigrant communities is they tend to live together, because it makes it easier. And then you say, man, have we considered this as an option? Have we considered all of the things that are different about our dinner experiences, as well as are similar? Then you could really create
That's
opportunities
it.
for inflection. And that is why I think it's more interesting. It's you are able to share your customs, and then talk about what we have
Yeah,
in
because
common
you know what,
by celebrating the
I
things that are
have been
different.
thinking a lot about inclusion and how to create diversity in advertising and creative fields. I don't think that it is an objection to. I don't think the largely white staffs at most ad agencies is a product of intentional bias necessarily. I think it is because agencies have been so steered towards being efficient that, and this isn't an excuse. This is actually a bigger problem. They're so
Yeah.
steered towards being efficient that they're afraid to make 10 extra seconds to have someone with a different story that they have to figure out throughout the day. That it's like, no, that lady looks just like the rest of us. This is going to be faster. It's easier to understand that. It's messed up.
I mean, think about it this way: how hard how how hard must it be for someone to be creative while trying to consider if their peers will understand their culture? So they have to like try to like most minorities and women, right? We get what white guys want because that's what we're advertised. Like that's how we're advertised too. That's how we blend in. That's why we code switch. That's why we change the way we speak because we're trying to get in. We're trying to get along to go along, right? And so we're doing a double duty on our creative work where we're trying to get into the headspace and character of someone else and then be creative
It's
at the
such
same
a
time. That
how
makes it
much does your
infinitely harder
creative
to be
change
creative.
from the way the idea is born in your brain to when it gets down on paper when you're doing something for a white audience or for a white client that do you translate it? Do you change the tone of it? I mean, everybody who's writing something should be changing the tone for the final customer, but how different is that from from the genesis of the idea?
I try not to change it too much. I think what I've discovered is this is funny. When I watch commercial right now, the entire idea of funny in media is literally just a white person doing a black person thing, right? All the commercials are just like a suburban
Yeah.
mom rapping, right? Like that's
100%.
like that's the whole joke. Like, that's the entirety of the joke. And I'm like, well, fine then. What if I just
Right.
let the person that would be rapping rap? Like what if I just let that come from the community from which it came? Let people own their own identities. Uh, of course, it's not always as gangsta as I would necessarily live it in my life. But I try to do what I call subversive media, where I put the person in the scene that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So if I'm going to do something about a doctor, right? I'm going to have an Indian woman as the doctor.
Right.
Which is crazy because
No.
there's so many Indian women doctors, right? But you don't see that on TV anywhere. It's insane. You would think that doctors are only
right.
beautiful white men. Like, and that's not what any of my hospitals look like. I mean, you're hard pressed to find like a tall white guy in there. It's all like they're older or they're young immigrants. Right? It's like, and so why is that not reflected in my media? Why is that not reflected?
Yeah.
Why are they not reflected in
And
my
is it just
commercials?
for
Why are they not
why
reflected in my
why is that
advertisements,
though?
billboards and posters? Why is that? I can tell you why. I had a guy. I spoke at an at a about I spoke at an ad agency about cultural appropriation, and so a guy asked me. He says, what if the marketing, like what if the marketing says, or the market research says, that our audience is an older white audience? And so what people tend to do is they tend to reflect the audience in the advertisement so that they will attach themselves to them. My argument to that is two things. A, marketing isn't just a reflection of culture. It imprints on culture too. It creates it while it's being made. The second one is, if Marvel can make you care about a giant purple monster who snaps his fingers and disintegrates the entire universe, I think we can get you to identify with somebody who's at least a color that
Dude,
exists on this earth.
yes, I grew up in Queens and I worked at hospitals, and I don't remember too many white staff at any level in the hospital. I mean, it was all African American, Indian, Puerto Rican, like it was everything but
At
essentially
any
white.
level.
But you're right. When I watched Grey's Anatomy, it's like there's one black dude who's like in the background, but that's not what a hospital really looks like.
At all, in any way. I think if you look at the Good Doctor is actually very diverse. I mean, their lead character is an autistic kid. But it is interesting when you see that. It's because they're trying to reflect back what they think their audiences want to see. What we have to come to grips with the fact is that audiences want to see relatable motivation and intention, not necessarily just skin tone and name. Black Panther made $1 billion because the intentionality of the movie was relatable, not because
the story was really
there's that
compelling.
many black people in America that watched the movie 15 times. The story was incredible. I mean, Infinity War, like I said, my rant right now about Infinity War. All of these people are superheroes, aliens, and monsters. Um, and so if you cried when Thanos sacrificed his daughter, it's because you understand what it would mean to lose someone that dear to you, especially when you have to do what you feel like you need to do for the greater good. That's a universal emotion. It has nothing to do with the shade of the character. And but that takes us back to our original point. How how do you arrive at those insights? I think you have to give creatives time to arrive at them, right? In space, in exposure, to understand
Yeah, I think it's a combination of
the
time.
complexities of the
More
universe.
time would
That's
be
what their
good,
job
and
is.
agencies have really just been struggling with that. Just time for people to think, and time for people to not think. Just time for
Oh
people
yeah.
to kind of pace around and background process. And then also, it's how agencies allow creative people to express themselves and share ideas, because it seems like in the creative department there's a lot more open conversation about an idea and why it's good or bad and what's working, or maybe if we did this, or I'd like to have this kind of person in it because of this reason. But then once it moves out of the creative department, it gets boiled down into that. Well, we got a PowerPoint to put together, so I need a keyframe. What's it going to be? And it becomes the production. Like then it goes back into we're counting every hour. So get your
Mm-hmm.
idea buttoned up so it can be presented.
Yeah. It's an interesting problem. I think we need to. I mean, the first thing I think is always dialogue. Having these conversations, like not sweeping it under the bus because it's hard. I mean, depression is real. Anxiety is real. I haven't met a creative today that doesn't deal with depression and anxiety. And when you tell a creative, if this doesn't go out today, something horrible is going to happen. They really feel that, and they feel it in a way that it's not just like, oh, maybe this is my job. I mean, they feel it to a suicidal degree. I met, there's a epidemic of graphic designers who just disappear in the middle of projects, or especially when you have a freelancer, or they just disappear in the middle, or towards the end, or in the beginning when they become overwhelmed because they don't want to disappoint
Right.
the person. Of course, they are disappointing you by disappearing, but they don't have to face the disappointment. Um, and that all comes in with an anxiety, and in a world where we don't have enough conversation about mental health to begin with, how are people even able to manage that conversation? uh I'm not saying you got to treat grown-ups like children, but you do have to understand you're asking something unique, so your actions have to be unique in return.
All right. Well, that was a point well made, Eric. I'm really glad that I saw your post on LinkedIn. I don't remember who shared it, and I'm glad that you were willing to come on and talk. This was time well spent. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you having me, and this, I'm always open to talk about stuff that matters.
Yeah, dude. I have a feeling you and I are going to talk more. Yeah, because you have a lot of interesting ideas. Tell people where they can find you online and where they can read your blog. I want to make sure you get your 2,000 monthly views, which I'm sure you're shattering now.
I mean, so finding me on LinkedIn is pretty simple, right? Eric S. Thomas on LinkedIn, or ericsthomas.com. Uh, I'm also Eric S. Thomas on Facebook, but I'm maxed out on my friends. So LinkedIn is usually the best. I'm starting to use Twitter again. I'm trying to get back into that, since that's where I can really hold my rant sessions,
I know
which
you
is,
got to keep them short though. You got to keep them tight.
but now they have threads, so I can just rant into infinity. Uh, so that's Eric underscore S underscore Thomas, until I get that Eric S. Thomas back under my control.
Got it. And yeah, I know you got a lot of speaking going on. Any speaking coming up?
Funny enough, I think this is my mental health month, right? So I'm speaking on I'm speaking on entrepreneurs managing, um, when they have a lot on their plate and they don't know what to kind of do with it. And I'm also speaking about millennial entrepreneurship and mental health Saturday at, I think, TyCon.
Oh,
So there's a
very
few
cool.
things too.
If you
All right,
send me links, I will put them in the show notes for you.
all right, cool.
All right, man. Thanks again. This was really a great conversation, and I appreciate you making time.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep, I do.